Alrighty. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for another wonderful SCORE workshop. Today, we're going to be speaking about lean startup. But before I go into that, I'd love to tell you a little bit about SCORE. SCORE was founded in 1964. It is a national organization, but it is also a nonprofit organization, and it's nationwide volunteer group where we resource partner with the Small Business Administration to provide counseling to America's small businesses, people like yourself. We have over 320 chapters and over 11,000 members. And our goal is to be here for you at the life of your business. We help you, we educate you, we counsel you, and we mentor you. For SCORE Houston in particular, we have 12 counseling offices around Greater Houston area with 100 plus active members. And all these members, like you will find one today, Jim, has real world experience in different fields and industries. Our services are free, all free, face to face or email counseling. We also do free on site mentoring when we have that opportunity again. We do seminars and workshops like you're attending today, and we also have a speakers bureau. You can visit us right now at houston.score.org for more information. So I just want you to sit back, dream big, create your plan, take action, and don't forget to come and get some free counseling at SCORE. At the end of this presentation, we will invite you to take a poll where we would ask you how this was today and if you would like to get a mentor to work with you or any type of information you require for your business. So let me quickly introduce your speaker. Your speaker today is Jim O'Sullivan. Jim, not only is he a SCORE a mentor, Jim is also the vice president of the education department here at SCORE Houston. Jim O'Sullivan is a retired CTO from an Energy 500 company with a broad range of expertise in technology, strategy, product development, marketing, and mentoring and coaching. Jim is associated with several incubator and accelerator programs in Houston through mentoring and business plan judging. So Jim holds 3 engineering degrees. He's a pretty smart guy and an MBA. So I want to introduce you to this morning to Jim O'Sullivan. And Jim, please go ahead and take it from here and tell us about Lean Startup. Thank you.
Good morning. I hope everyone can hear me and see me. We had a few little glitches in starting this morning. We're going to talk about the Lean Startup, which is, as you see on the road, a journey. And along that journey, I will take a few deviations just to give you some background information and make it a little bit more fun, along with some examples. The Lean Startup is essentially the jargon that's being used today in the industry, especially in incubators and accelerators, in order to get people's ideas launched into the market. So we'll move on. I'm going to give you some introduction and definitions. Then a lot of that which Karen went over, I'll briefly go over again. We'll go into a history of the Lean Startup and how it works or how it should work. And then we'll talk about some of the pitfalls that people who follow the Lean Startup method sometimes have and how to avoid those pitfalls. And then we'll have a summary and I will be here to answer your questions. Now, if you raise your hand, I can't see it on a webinar like this. So please put all your questions in the question and answer box and I will get to them at the end. Okay, introduction. Yes, I am a retired CTO, 45 years in the oil patch. Mostly all of it is associated with, offshore, upstream, development period, oil and gas. I was involved in the design and the technology associated with those big floating platforms and fixed platforms and the pipelines all offshore. So over that 45-year period, we had the birth and growth of the entire offshore oil industry. And I bring that up because there was a lot of innovation that took place along the way, and a lot of new designs and launching of new systems. So during my career, I have seen a lot of new technology brought into the marketplace. And as it says on the screen, I've had my successes and my unsuccesses. And I will talk today a little bit later about one of my unsuccesses. As Karen mentioned, I mentor at SCORE, and I also mentor at Capital Factory and ION. These are two accelerators in Houston. And I will talk a little bit more about accelerators in a moment. My personal focus is on incubation. This is starting a company and getting it into the market in the first place. And that is my segue into the definitions of incubators. Incubators go from first need definition into first customer. And I'll go over a lot about what I mean by first need. But this is where you have a market potential that you see, and then you develop a solution to meet that market potential. And then you go through the process, mostly the lean startup process, in order to get that particular idea into the marketplace. Once you have gotten some traction or you've landed on the beach, then you go to an accelerator. And that is the period where you go from the first customer to rapid growth. And this normally involves venture capital. And let me say a few things real quick about accelerators. If you look at the history of new startups, most of the ones about 15, 20 years ago were all by debt financing and by family and friends. Then came a period of gradual shifting away from bank financing to venture capital financing. And the big shift there is the risk profile of the people supplying the money. Venture capitalists essentially come to the accelerator markets or to the venture, the new startup market in order to get better returns in their experience in the other investment avenues. So the venture capitalists, by and large, have created the accelerators, and they create them to help refine, first attract the best minds and the best ideas, and then refine those ideas to a point where the venture capitalists can come in and choose which ones they want to support and which ones they don't. So the accelerator is essentially a finishing school. And think of Shark Tank. I'm sure you've all seen Shark Tank. That's exactly what an accelerator is meant to do, is to get the person to a point where they can go in front of Shark Tank. Now, there's also organic growth, which was the traditional way of growing a company, which is gradual, step by step. Initial cash flows are plowed back into the business, and you grow more slowly. Now, we deal at SCORE a lot with people in the incubator area, and also the organic growth, gradual step-by-step progression into their business. We don't normally get into the accelerator area because our focus is on bank financing rather than bringing in venture capital. Okay, the history of the lean startup. The term lean startup came from Eric Ries, and he coined it back in 2011 in a book called The Lean Startup. And he did it so that people could gain market entry without going into debt or losing control. He came up through Silicon Valley, and he saw within the Silicon Valley environment a lot of people coming in with very good ideas and essentially giving up control of those ideas for venture capital or seed capital in order to get founded and started. So he figured that there has to be a way that people can get into the business, start a business without necessarily going into deep debt or going into or losing control of their company. He learned from very early failures that The key to all this is start with identifying customer need. And I'll mention this over and over again because it's the key to the process. You have to find the pain. You have to find within a market, target market, where are the holes? What needs to be filled? You're looking for a problem that's looking for a solution. And you need to find it and define it. And then the idea of the lean startup is to identify and validate all the customer assumptions you have, and you have to do it quickly and cheaply. What I mean by customer assumptions is, as you develop a solution for the need that you see in your target customers, you'll be actually making certain assumptions about those customers, certain assumptions about their needs and desires and wants. And what you need to do is very quickly and cheaply as you can, create a test of the customer's reactions to your assumptions. Are you making the right assumptions? Are they going to behave the way you think they're going to behave in the marketplace? Now, this whole approach of testing assumptions in order to move to the next step and grow is not new. It's been in the technical world for quite a while. And this is one of my getting off the road and giving you a story. And that is, the whole process of lean startup is patented after something called technology readiness, which was developed by NASA, specifically the Jet Propulsion Lab in the early 70s. And it was meant to look at a piece of new technology and find out what is unproven, what assumptions do they have about the performance of this technology that is not proven and must be validated. And before then, they did not go through the rigorous process of step-by-step finding the most fundamental assumption, validating that assumption, and moving on to the next assumption. And JPL at the time was developing a new class of satellite that was going to go through the solar system and take pictures of all the planets, all 9 at that time, including Pluto. Pluto dropped off the map after that. But they were going to do this, what they call the Grand Tour. And the satellites they built, you probably know, and that is Voyager 1 and Voyager 2. Those satellites are still operating 43 years later. And the technology in those satellites were simple compared to the technology we get in smartwatches or cell phones today. So they did a very good job of making sure all the technology they put into those satellites was validated. But again, the whole process of challenging assumptions was dated back to the time that NASA started this. And I'll also add, most other industries, like the Defense Department and other industries, all followed NASA's lead. Even the oil and gas industry got into this area of technology readiness as time goes on. Now, how does it work in the business world? You research a targeted market for areas of improvement. What I mean by that is you compare current alternatives, you identify the processes and product needs, and then you also identify the unmet needs and you define your value proposition. Now, I use in this presentation the term value proposition and solution interchangeably. Most people understand that value proposition, it comes from value creation. And value creation is the cost associated with building and delivering a product solution to a customer and the price they're willing to pay. The difference between those two, sometimes you call profit, but really that is the value creation in our economy. So what you're trying to ascertain is, what is that value proposition that you're going to be making to the clients in order to meet their unmet needs? And within those propositions, you're going to identify the basic assumptions that you're making about the client. Is the client ready for your value proposition? How is it more appealing than current choices? The readiness of the client to accept your value proposition has a lot to do with whether you're going to have an easy ride into the market or a difficult ride into the market. And everything you do and everything you propose to the client must always be seen in the context of alternative choices. And in order to do the test, you create a minimum viable product, which is called the MVP. And this minimum viable product is the means that you're going to use to validate the core customer assumptions that you have. And again, the MVP is really testing the idea, not selling the product, meaning you're really fashioning a way to test, do you really understand the client's behavior? Do you really understand what they want and what they need? And in so doing, you have to have metrics and criteria already in place to know if the client is accepting these ideas or not. And the metrics and criteria are very important because without them, you could be wandering through the woods for a long time, not knowing, have my assumptions been correct? Have I been moving in the right direction? Now, market fit is a term that comes with the MVP. You're going to try to fit your product and the market together. You're going to try to align the product, its delivery system, and the customer's needs all in one. And you start that by analyzing statistics from the MVP. Now, if you are successful, you build on the MVP features by feature. And if you're not successful, you're going to have to re-aim, or what they call pivot, by changing the features that you are proposing to the clients. Now, those metrics we talked about earlier, if you're using an app, or you're going to use the internet in order to put forward your product to the customer base to see if they're accepting, you have a lot of tools like Google Analytics. And just like if you're doing a bench test for that technical evaluation for technology readiness, you have at your disposal in that lab all sorts of measurement tools, all sorts of multimeters to see if in fact you have the right voltages, the right composition, in order to determine whether or not this device that you're testing is successful. You have the same thing in this case, because you have Google Analytics, which will tell you how often the client hits on your site. What do they do once they're on your site? Do they go off and look at this feature versus that feature? Do they come back? And one of the statistics you really pay a lot of attention to is, do they come back to it after they've been to it one time? Do they tell their friends? In other words, is there a growth in the number of people looking at your site and looking at your product? Is this growing exponentially or linearly? What you want is exponential growth, because that means that word of your product is going viral and you're going to more than your original target market. And those are the people coming in. Now, if you're pivoting and you're looking at different features in your product, that means you're getting some attraction there, and you may be looking well, what is the right benefit that you need to be focusing on. So you may change some of the features in the product. You also may be putting out multiple products at the same time to different client groups to see which client groups like A versus B. But if you start going into what's called changing your target market, then you're starting to get into the area of market push rather than market fit. And that's what this talks about. If you really haven't identified the need properly up front, fit becomes push. What that means is you have a solution looking for a problem rather than a problem looking for a solution. And this is not a good situation. But this is the most common client I see through both Capital Factory, Ion, and also SCORE. Folks come in with an idea, and then they're looking to see how they can fit this idea into the marketplace. They have not done the research on the client need. And one of the reasons they fall into this trap is because they're romancing their creation. Many founders who will actually be the creator of their products, and they're romancing it. They're falling in love with it, and they can't understand why other people don't have a similar view of their product. This blinds them to customer reaction, especially rejection. And they keep on pushing and pushing and pushing, looking for some market out there that will accept their solution and their idea, rather than simply dropping back and realizing they have to go back to the client and look at their needs in order to refashion their product accordingly. Market pull is what you're really looking for. You start with the need. And this creates a must-have. What you really want to have is a clients that are ready, which means they must have this product. This is the feeling that they have. So you create the market pull by having first the problem that needs a solution. You spend your time looking at the marketplace, comparing it to the current solutions, coming up with a definition of the value proposition that you want, and then you go forward. I'll give you an example here is the medical industry. This is big pharmaceuticals. They have a history of not wasting their time on developing new drugs. They already go into the marketplace and figure out what drugs are needed. And is there a large enough market to make it worthwhile for themselves to develop these drugs? For instance, the development of statin drugs for cholesterol was because the American diet has gotten to the point where they had high cholesterol. The same thing with diabetes drugs you see coming out now. Our love for salt and sugar, we're creating markets for drugs to put off diabetes or control it, and at the same time, drugs that can control high blood pressure from the salt. So they knew the problem. And then when they went about is, how do we find a solution? And they use technologies like computer-aided drug design and others in order to refine what it is that they can develop given the technology they have. Now, there are medical breakthroughs that work their way into the marketplace. That's done every day. But by and large, most of the medical devices and drugs that come through the FDA are very similar to what's been done before, and they don't necessarily use new technologies. They simply use combinations of what's been known. So in this case, the entire solution process is started from need and not started from invention and creation. The FDA has two approval processes, in fact. One is you claim that your drug or device is very similar to something that's already in the marketplace. That's called the 510K approach. And you're asking the FDA to validate your assumptions on this drug or device based on prior experience. There are new inventions that come in, and the FDA has a process called de novo, meaning new. And that is a much more rigorous process for them to approve the drugs for eventual sale. Now, if you look at the statistics, well over 90% of all the drugs and devices the FDA approves come through 510K, meaning very rarely do they go the whole route of developing something entirely new. So in this process, we said that you have to start with compare current solutions. And when you do that, what you're really doing is you're looking at the tangibles. the performance, price, and reliability. And you're looking at the market, and you're looking at the attributes that the customer is considering in their purchase. And this is a very exacting process, and it's very different for every product and market out there. But what you need to do is identify those attributes, and then you're going to weight the attributes, how important it is in the decision process. And that's where a lot of the assumptions come from, because you are making an assumption on how important this attribute is versus another attribute in the customer's buy decision. And these are the very assumptions that you are going to have to be testing. But I'll also mention you need to look at intangibles. And the two intangibles that come to my mind the most often is risk, perceived risk, how the customer sees risk, not necessarily statistically what is risk, but how they perceive risk. And also the question of loyalty. And many times I talk to people, I see their pitch deck in a business plan competition, and they completely miss the areas of the intangibles. In fact, many times in business plan competitions, I'll see a graph that does a comparison of their product versus other products in the market. And they have big green checks against their product and big black X's against all the others. When I see that, I immediately realize that these folks really did not do a comparison of the current solutions rigorously. They have put this slide in there for a sales promotion, not necessarily as an analytical tool in order to perceive what it is that the clients really need. Now, I have another story here, and that is my own experience with intangibles. As I said before, I dealt with the development of technologies for offshore oil and gas production, not the exploration part, not the drilling, not the operating phase. It's the design and build of these very large structures. So the tools that I provide the industry are in the hundreds of millions of dollars that take years to build. These are the big platforms on which they put the production system and from which they do the drilling. And we understood from the clients that there was a problem with the motions of these platforms, particularly the floating ones, of course, and when you get to very deep water. And this was causing problems over the life of the field in something called fatigue, which means you give 5, 10, 15 years in, and then things start to break because they slowly are wearing out or cracks progress. So we came up with a hull that actually had very low motions, particularly knocking out the motions that caused fatigue problems. And we went through all the technology readiness levels that I talked about before. We did all the model testing, all the computer simulation work with some of the largest computers in the world. And we had a very strong case that said, we can overcome this problem of fatigue in your subsystems. And we never got any traction. And then the reason for it is, it turns out that oil companies are siloed. You have exploration folks, you have people who do the development, called the development companies, that build the hardware, and then you have people who operate. And if you know anything about the oil industry, you realize those silos are very strong. They don't talk to each other. But anyway, within the world of the development, which is where our hull form would be used, the project managers were all given their bonuses on the basis of meeting schedule and cost. And when we brought in something new, and our assumption was for no extra cost and no extra schedule, you can have all these other benefits. Well, they didn't see it that way. Anything new to them was risk on budget and risk on schedule. And they weren't going to take the chance. They could build something they understood And in many ways, they let the operating groups later on worry about other issues like metal fatigue on key components. So that's our whole approach, which we spent years developing, was put on the shelf because of intangibles, not the tangibles, not performance, not price, not reliability, but it was the intangibles. So that was a lesson learned. Okay, after you've compared current solutions, you're going to identify a test market. And this is one of the big areas that people have problems with when they use a lean startup. I want to take my MVP, I want to take my beta prototype and test it. But where's the client base to do this testing in? Now, Eric Ries lived out in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has a very accessible market for new users, early adopters. And these folks were well known. So you could roll out an app on almost any subject into this marketplace, and they'll react to it. They'll look at it and kick it and twist it and do everything else. And they'll create a lot of Google Analytics along the way. So you can see, are the people accepting this product or not accepting it? If they go into it, do they stay long enough to do anything useful? Do they just bounce in and bounce out? Do they come back to it? And again, I'll mention something about Google Analytics. They give you a lot of information about how people treat your website or your Facebook or whatever. Facebook has their own Google Analytics similarity, but if it's just a website, you'll be using basically Google Analytics. So they can tell you everything about how often they come back, how the same IP address comes back, how long they stay, what they do when they're in there. So there is no problem in that area. But they also can tell you an enormous amount of information about the people who actually are visiting your site. They can tell you the demographics, your gender, your ethnicity. They can even tell you your buying habits. They can tell what income brackets you're in. They do this all by how you use their Google search engine. And when you realize how much information they know about the people who actually go to these sites and they can give the client that type of information, it makes you start to wonder about bringing in your footprint and letting that type of information out. It's hard to stop though. But the Google platform and other platforms similar to it, as I said, Facebook has their own analytics. They're very useful for somebody trying to test their product in the marketplace. Okay, actionability. This is a variation on the lean startup. And it really comes down to, can the customer identify, immediately use your product? And what I mean by that is sometimes people develop a product and they're focused on maybe the front end of that product and what it gives the client as far as information, but it doesn't necessarily carry through. So one of the things you need to do in an early test is, within this client base, is the answers your product is giving to the customer immediately actionable? Or does it require changes to use your solution? Because many products have an enterprise impact. What I mean by that is you can use these products and they impact the entire organization, not just one small group. And especially a lot of the newer products that tend to aggregate data and analyze that data. And I have a client who had a way of developing a picture of all the energy use that was going through a particular plant. And then they could aggregate this information beautifully, pulling it for different databases and different sources. And they could create this wonderful dashboard. And that was their product. But what they were finding is their clients really couldn't use it. I mean, how do I turn this into a solution? So that client then was starting to migrate on their own without ever being told to a consulting basis of showing them how they can streamline their company. And my suggestion was they have to change their product pitch to the client in the first place and not talk so much about the technology piece that aggregates pictures and aggregates data, but focuses more on how their company at the end can streamline itself and deliver a solution. I give you IBM as an example. Back in 2010, a little bit prior to 2010, IBM, who previously was the builder and seller of big machines, IBM shifted to a company that supplied the clients solutions, business solutions. They were getting into the consulting business, not the hardware business. So they pivoted their entire business model. And by doing that, they laid out a solution a company may have, and they brought their equipment in as part of the solution. But again, the business pitch was providing the client an actionable outcome. Now, another issue related to this is what I call product cause disruptions within the client. Does your product have blockers because it changes the way things are done? And do these blockers have enough veto power to stop? And what you need to do again in your assumption period is to spot this as an assumption. You either make the assumption that these people can't block its use, or they can. Another medical story. I have a relative who is an executive in big pharma, and they came up with a treatment for a particular disease that was cheaper, better for the client, and just all around more favorable outcomes. But they couldn't figure out why there was no traction to the offer. It turns out that in order for their treatment to be used, the primary caregiver of a patient needs to bring in a consultant or a specialist in order to do whatever this treatment is. Now, the primary caregiver realized that when they did that, they are giving away a lot of their own revenue because they're the ones who used to do the previous solution. And this solution was effective, but it simply wasn't as effective or as quick or as beneficial to the client. But it was still approved by the FDA. So these primary caregivers dug in their heels and said no. And Big Pharma, in this case, actually had to withdraw the product because it simply wasn't getting any traction. So there is an example of something not being actionable because there were blockers, because the new product was going to disrupt the current scheme. And again, all these issues here of is it actionable as far as being immediately usable? Is it actionable because is it inactionable because there are blockers? All this should come out in your need assessment up front when you start looking at where is the pain point within this current client base. Now we're going to go over in summary. I think I've said it several times. You must start by identifying unmet needs. You've heard it before when people say you do a business plan, you start with who are you going to give this to and why are you better than the other person? And sometimes you don't really give that much attention because in your mind, you're already starting with the solution. And you're sort of going backwards in order to figure out and justify why it is a better solution. If you go that route, you are going to have problems. And as I said, I face a lot of clients who come in with this wonderful idea, this wonderful solution, and they want to know what market to try it on. And I have to give them the bad news that stop, back up, and start again, looking at your target market or what they think is their target market, and do a rigorous research and comparison of the solutions, and then justify the value proposition that you have built into your solution. Then you use market fit to confirm market pull. Don't turn market fit into throwing things up against the market wall to see what sticks. If it doesn't stick, change a feature. And if that still doesn't stick, change the market. You can do that. And believe me, there are a lot of people who have done it and they have eventually been successful, but it's taken them a lot longer and a lot more money. And probably lost a little bit of control along the way because they had to bring some venture capital in to sustain them. So you need to use the market fit concept to confirm assumptions. And you have to take the time to reduce down all your knowledge of that market to customer assumptions, and then devise a way of testing those assumptions. Now, an MVP, as I said earlier, is really a test vehicle. You're not trying to sell the product during that period of time. You're trying to gain knowledge of your customer. And many people put all the value on, I need to sell it, I need to make money. And I go, that's not the purpose of an MVP. Many times an MVP actually is put out there and you create this picture of what it is that you're selling as if it was real. And they push on the buy button and there's nothing there. Or a little statement saying, oh, this is all under development. And when we finally develop it, we'll get back in touch with you. It's a bit of a fraud, but it's done all the time. So again, an MVP is a means to answering questions about validity of assumptions. And finally, make sure your product is actionable. In the research of need, see if there are any change consequences that need to take place in order for your product to be properly used. And if there is, you need to change your pitch in order to expand the footprint of that product in order to provide the ultimate solution. Also, you need to spot and neutralize disruptive blockers. The group I mentioned earlier about the medical practice, what happened there was they reintroduced that product sometime later, but this time they introduced it through the primary physicians. They gave them a piece of the action to encourage them to be part of the solution, and it worked. So that is my story on the lean startup. Start with need, test, then identify what that need is, what the value proposition is, figure out what assumptions you're really having about the customer that need to be answered. Go to the market, a test market, in order to answer those assumptions. And then make sure in your research of the need, you identify that are there changes necessary in the organization to use your product? Or are there people who are going to block this because it's not in their best interest? And then you try to bring them on board. So that's my story today. And I'm here for questions. Okay.
Well, thank you. Okay, I was going to tell you, we have some questions in the chat. Are you able to see those?
The questions came in chat, not the Q&A?
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll go to chat.
Okay, sorry.
And what the problem with chat is it's a smaller font, so I need to put my glasses on to read them.
I did ask them.
I'm not hearing hello, good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good stuff, thank you. This great webinar, thank you. Do you need the product prototype ready to do the MVP? Absolutely not. What you need to have ready is the ability to convey the concept to the client. As I said, it's a bit of a fraud sometimes. You can explain what it can do, and maybe you have a few features in there that give them the idea of what it is, like a special search engine or something else, but it may even be just a hardwired test to show them what happens, rather than a true functional device. So you don't really need the product. You could, it depends on what you call prototype. But again, you put the features into the MVP that test the assumption. You don't have to layer up a lot of features. That takes time and money. But you really want to see, are your assumptions about the client, do they really put the same weight on this feature as you think they should be putting? And again, that these words may sound easy, but I know they're difficult to do, which is why people like myself, mentor, I'll work with you and try to tell you what it is you have to really test in this particular product. But you really don't need a fully functional prototype. And again, the whole issue is get out there fast while you're not burning up all your friend and family money and not have to turn to venture capitalists in order to sustain yourself. If you have a question, please use the Q&A. Can I do MVP before 510K approval? Well, it depends. One of the reasons that you have to go to the FDA is to actually put your product on the market. They don't like you putting an unproven, unvalidated, or uncertified product on the market. But having said that, I had another client who was working with the Veterans Administration on an expert system that would be doing analysis of certain vet conditions of the vet, post-traumatic syndrome type issues. And he went to the VA and talked to a couple of vets in order to get a feel for how bad this problem is. Are these people going undetected? And would there be a market for a product that would use AI techniques to figure out do they have this issue or not? That was all within the realm of doability without offering the treatment itself, because they were not really offering any treatment. They were simply asking the question. So in a way, I say, yes, you can certainly do this before you get to 510K. You certainly you need to do the research before you go there. But you just can't offer the product itself and then test, oh, well, did you like the product? No, you can't do that. You can't let them use or test the device itself. Can you please expand what is meant by 510K? 510K is a actual reference within a regulatory document of the FDA that says you can claim that your product, whether it be a drug or device, is similar enough to your product that the FDA does not require you to do as extensive clinical trials to prove the validity. Because the FDA has all series of clinical trials. Toxicity, does it kill a person? Or does it really work, and is it beneficial? So you may be able to skip a couple of these steps if you can convince the FDA that this is the same thing as brand X over here. Now, there's a downfall to 510K. That is, the FDA says, fine, your product is very similar to it. But then when you go to your performance test, because you'll still have to go out and support the fact that it works. The FDA will say you have to do at least as good as the person you compared yourself to. Otherwise, the FDA is not going to approve you. So there's a little catch there. But in a way, it's nice. The FDA does the filtering of all undesirable and products that really don't bring any benefit. But I think that is the way to do 510K. Dipolo is an entire different approach. You tell the FDA this is entirely new, brand new, new technology, and we're going to have to go the full 100 yards on getting this approved before we can go to market. And the reason why people want to do that is you build a lot of competitive barriers and by coming up with something new. And you're not simply saying it's a me too, it's a me too, it's a me too. So I hope that explains a little bit more about 510K. Is this only for tech companies? No. Let's take a company a beauty salon who wants to open up in a certain part of the city. That's certainly not technology. Your look there is the customers in that part. Do they really need another beauty salon? Who is out there? Are they meeting the needs of the customers or not? So this is not just tech. And again, I'm glad you brought this up because one of the basic research tools you can use in locating a company, for instance, and comparing yourself to all the people around you, competitor-wise, is use the public library. You'll be amazed at the information those librarians can get for you about do you or do you not, looking at the competitors you have in a certain, very specific area, in a very specific industry. And you can find out everything about them, even with the pricing structures they use. So it's amazing the information that you can get. And the librarians down at the Central Library are more than willing to help you and guide you. We have a webinar, we had it last month on the head research librarian from the Houston Downtown Library, who came in and talked about just one of his many search engines that he can use. So I encourage you, if you want to do a location-based type business and you need to find more about the competitors, or you are a supplier of components into an industry where location may not be as important, but you need to find out who else is in this business supplying those components, whether it be rivets or baking goods into restaurants. You can find all that out and you can do that research very effectively. Use the public library.
Hi, Jim. If
Yes.
you go to question and answer, there's a few more questions there that you can answer before we finish wrap up.
Okay.
Go
Let
to the
me just go
question and
down real quick.
go to go to
Thank
question and
you. Please put, okay, great. So I'll go back to question and answers now. Okay. Can I get a copy of your slides? Well, I'll tell you what, you can get a copy of the video. And hopefully the video you get actually works. I just discovered when I did mine, the transitions didn't work. Anyway, you can get a copy of the video by going to the Houston. And on the top, there's three choices. And there's one called Take a Workshop. Press that. And when the home page comes up, there's a blue button that says download a workshop, notes, and I forget what the other word is, notes and videos or something. Anyway, you click that and that actually will take you to a file that's categorized by date. And it will have all the webinars. So you need to just mark the date that's given it. But in order to do that, I would wait until the end of the week because the person on my team that does that downloading to our website does it once a time, one time for all the webinars, and he'll do it towards the end of the week. So yeah, that's what I would do, is just go and get the video. Yes, I like the content. I would like to work with him unless there's a better recommendation what I need. Are you asking if you want to come to me as a mentor? That's fine. You can come to me as a mentor. You have to go through the website again and say, I want a mentor. And in there, you can actually identify who it is you would like to be your mentor. Okay, do you recall the name of the library training? Karen, do you remember the gentleman's name?
yes, I have it.
I think it's Mueller is the second name, M-U.
M-U-R-U-L-E-R. Murello. Murello.
Murll. Okay, he sounds Italian. And what was his first name?
Hold 1 second.
I think with the last name you could probably get it. But
Yeah.
he's the head guy down there, and he tickled pink for you to come there and say, I heard this on a SCORE webinar. And he goes, yes, because that's why he puts on his webinars for free for us, is because he wants
His name
people
is
to come and
John.
use it.
His name
John,
is John Murello, and the webinar, the topic is using Houston Public Library resources. We're
do you know the
having a
date? Do you know the date so they can download that video?
we're having one coming up in January.
Okay, great, great. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Can you answer the question on it? There's a lot of phony business advice out there. Are there websites or magazines that you think are credible that we should read or follow to help us?
Oh, there's a lot of jargon out there. A lot of people pushing uh, the concept of the lean startup. What I would suggest is, given what you've heard here today, and given the pitfalls, especially the market fit one when it comes market push, you can read all that stuff, and I think after a while it starts to get repetitive. Because quite frankly, it's a simple concept, and that is understand the market you're going after, identify need within that market, and identify the competitors, and look for the holes in the offerings that the customers have, and let that be the guide for your product, your value proposition. That's what it comes down to. Now, there may be some articles out there on how to do a comparative analysis of competitors. That would be very useful, and that is a science unto itself. I could do a webinar just on that, identifying features, identifying benefits, giving weights to each one of those things to figure out which is the more preferred approach. So those things I would download on, and also anything you can find on how do I find a target market to test, things like that. Articles like that would be very useful to do, especially if you can get one that's tailored towards your market, because there's a lot of differences. It has to be very specific for what you're trying to do. So is that it, Karen? I don't see any more questions.
That is it. That is it.
Okay.
Can you submit the poll, please?
Oh, you want me to do it?
I don't have access to it.
Well, I have to, I think, poll, good. There it is. And the poll is now launched. It's only 2 questions. One has to do with this webinar and its value to you, and the other one has to do with, do you need support from a mentor going forward? Okay. Let me see, our percentage is up to 14 out of 22. So we'll leave it go for a little bit longer to try to get that up to a higher percent. Karen, do you want to say something about some of your upcoming webinars on incubator series by the people finishing this?
Sure. For I think November is already filled out.
We have a series coming up building on getting into a marketplace, an incubation, how to start. Like I think next week it's how to do a business in Texas specifically.
Next week is how to start a business in Texas
Yeah.
specifically. Then we have cash flow. Um, if you need help with cash flow, the week after, and then there's a break for Thanksgiving.
But there's a series coming out aimed at how to get into business, and we also produce every month a two-part seminar on how to start and run a business on Saturdays. And there's two successive Saturdays because there's a lot of material. I think both of them are 3-hour sessions. And to ask somebody to sit and do a Zoom webinar for more than 3 hours, I think is cruel and unusual punishment. So we have put it into two series, and these are SCORE mentors, and they're all experts in their field. And I think it's well worthwhile to sit in and look at that. Okay, I think we're starting to plateau out at 17 of 20. So what I'll do is I'll end the poll, and I will thank everybody for coming.
Yes, and if anybody, we're having the following Wednesday on the 17th, on the 18th, on the 17th, sorry, on the 11th, is how to start a business in Texas. On Saturday, the 14th and the 21st is how to start and run a business. That's a 2-day webinar that you don't want to miss. And then we have sales basics coming up on the 19th and organizing to run a business on the 17th of November. So we will be sending you guys invitations to all of these. We look forward to having you attend. And thank you so much for coming today.
Okay. Take care, folks. Have a good day.
Okay, bye, Jim. Great job.
Bye-bye.